Let's take a look at another level of organization in terms of permissions and access, and that's going to be AWS Organizations. So go ahead and watch this video, and whenever you're ready, you can continue on ours. All right, so AWS Organizations. So we've looked at user groups, and now we're going to look at organizations. So what's the difference? Because they're very, very similar, and it can get a little bit confusing. The key difference is user groups are always tied to a single AWS account. You have your root user, and you can cascade permissions, right, to your user groups. Now, what if you had multiple AWS accounts, right? You set up multiple accounts, one for legal, one for HR, one for business side of things, but you still wanted to organize those accounts into groups. Maybe HR and legal, right? They belong to the same group. Maybe the business side, right, is in another group. So if you have multiple root accounts, you'd have to organize them via AWS Organizations. So just like user groups, but a level higher, right? We're no longer dealing with one root account, we're dealing with multiple. So AWS Organizations is a service that allows you to manage multiple AWS accounts centrally. It helps organizations group, secure, and control access across different AWS accounts within a business. Centrally control permissions for the accounts in your organization by using service control policies. So just like you apply policies to user groups, you can also apply them to AWS organizations. We're going to talk about what they're not called groups anymore. They're called organizational units. We'll discuss that in the next slide. So yeah, these control policies are restrictions on the AWS services, resources, and individual actions that users and roles in each account can access. So what do we call these groups? Well, we call them organizational units. An organizational unit is a grouping of AWS accounts with AWS organizations within AWS organizations that allow administrators to apply policies and manage permissions across multiple AWS accounts in a structured way. So the parallels, right, you can see to the user groups. Just remember, user groups tied to one AWS account, just one root account. Organizations can be tied to multiple AWS accounts. So when you create an IAM user, you're not actually spawning a new account. You're creating an instance of your original AWS account in a sense. Again, a little bit confusing. Just know, one root user, you're going to create user groups. You have multiple root users, multiple root accounts. You got to use organizations. So it makes it easier to manage accounts with similar business or security requirements. When you apply a policy to an organizational unit, all the accounts in that unit automatically inherit the permissions specified in the policy, just like if you're applying it to a user group. So by organizing separate accounts into OUs, you can more easily isolate workloads or applications that have specific security requirements. So say your company has accounts that can access only the AWS services that meet certain regulatory requirements. You can group these all together into one organizational unit. Then you can attach the policy, the correct policy to that OU that'll block access to all the AWS services that don't meet those requirements, right? Again, the access and control that you apply to your particular services depends on what your organization needs. Certain organizations, right, might have to meet, again, with the example of HIPAA, right, they might have to meet medical requirements. So you might have to put policies on certain groups so that you don't violate those rules. So let's take a look at how we might organize these multiple accounts. So we have, you can ignore the root here in the diagram. Don't think it's just one root account. It's one root organization that we're setting up. So imagine that your company has separate AWS accounts for the finance, information, technology, human resources, and legal departments. So we have 4 different accounts, so 4 different roots. So you decide to consolidate these accounts into a single organization so you can manage them from a central location. When you create the organization, this establishes the root. So notice, yeah, this is not a root Amazon account. This is the root of the organization. So in designing your organization, you consider the business, security, and regulatory needs of each department. So we have to group these together in a way that makes sense, right? So we have our big organization. Now let's create an organizational unit within that organization of accounts. So they're all grouped together by an organization. They're all part of the same business. So we call this level organization. Let's now partition these into OUs. So the finance and IT departments have requirements that don't really overlap. So we're not going to group these together in an OU. So you bring these accounts into your organization to take advantage of benefits such as consolidated billing. So that's one of the benefits. of handling accounts, multiple accounts as an organization is you can have all the billing just as like a single bill essentially. So you don't have to pay, separate bills, 4 separate bills. It'd just be one bill here because they're all part of the same root organization. But let's look at these other two, right? There's going to have some overlap between HR and legal, which makes some sense, right? If you're familiar with those departments, they definitely have to follow certain rules and regulations, right? So there's going to be some overlap. So HR and legal departments need access to the same services and resources. So it makes sense to put them in an OU. So now if I'm applying policies, I don't have to apply 1, 2, 3, 4 separate different policies. Remember, we call these policies the service control policies or SCPs. Now I just need to apply 3 sets of SCPs. So this is going to have an SCP, this is going to have an SCP, and this one's grouped together as an OU. So it's going to have a single SCP shared between the 2 accounts and the 2 departments. So placing them into an OU empowers you to attach policies that apply to both HR and legal departments' AWS accounts. So again, a little bit more efficient, saves you time, more organized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and explore AWS compliance.